And then we find from some of the people who've been affected by the da'wah of the Qutbiyyah, from the Muslimun. And what happened here is that when in some of the Muslim lands like Syria and Egypt, when the da'wah of Ikhwan, when they began the da'wah and the governments clasped upon them, then they fled and they sought refuge in which country? The country they call the country of the Wahhabis, and the greatest country of Kufr and Taghut, and they went and they sought refuge in Arabia, which we refuse to call Saudi Arabia, but we use this as a terminology because that's what it's called. So when they went there, some of the people who were within this peninsula got affected by their da'wah, and by the da'wah of Sayyid Qutb, and by the da'wah of Muhammad Qutb, and we'll mention some of the phrases of the people who got affected by that, which you can see the parallels between this and between their mentor and whose books they read and who are nurtured upon, and how this draws parallel with the Khawarij of old. So we find, for example, the likes of A'id al-Qarni, who says, for example, and he says this in his book Al-Misk wal-Ambar, page 335, and here he does a sin, he does takfir based upon a sin. Remember, this is one of the characteristics of the Khawarij, to do takfir upon a sin. So he says, so this, and he's talking here about the intoxicating drinks, the khamr and the wine and so on and so forth. He says, this is the greatest thing by which Allah is disobeyed, Allah the Most High disobeyed upon this earth. Okay? So he's made the khamr the greatest thing by which Allah is disobeyed. As for shirk and the rest of it, it's the musakkarat, the intoxicating things. This is the greatest thing by which Allah is disobeyed. And the Sheikh Abdul Malik bin Ahmad ibn al-Mubarak Ramadani al-Jazairi, who's wrote this excellent book in refutation of the Sururiyah, he comments and he says that this in itself is the madhab of the Khawarij, clearly manifest. Then he quotes from him some poetry that A'id al-Qarni, he says, so in this poetry, I'll just give the gist of it. He says that pray however much you want, and fast whatever you like, because the deen doesn't know or doesn't acknowledge the person or the worshipper who prays and he fasts, and he's got the the tasbih, and he does the tasbih and so on and so forth, but who abandons the world. In other words, what he's trying to say, that someone who doesn't look in the world and fiqh al-waqi and the politics and this and that and whatever, this is what he's getting at. He says that you are a qissis min al-ruhban, meaning you are from the Christians. Yeah? And then he continues, Anta min Ahmed yakfik al-malama. It means, and you have nothing to do with Ahmed, meaning Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? So again, Abdul Malik al-Jazairi comments on this, and he says, he's made it very, very clear that the person like this, who doesn't indulge in all this politics and this and whatever like them, then he is a qissis from the ruhban, meaning like a priest or a Christian, like the ascetics, the monks who go away in a monastery and keep themselves in there. And then he strengthened this by saying only in the same line later that you have nothing to do with Ahmed, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then there are so many other things concerning A'id al-Qarni, how he affirms the bid'ah of the Sufis, and he's very unfounded in his knowledge, and whoever wants to refer to more can refer. It's all documented here with the quotations, with the references, and so on. Then we move on to another person who's been affected by the likes of Muhammad Qutb, and this is Salman al-Awdah. So in his book, which is actually a cassette, Jalasa al-Rasif, then he says about the people who sing, the singers, and who do this in public, and who, are guilty of this sin. This is what he says. هَذَا لَا يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَهُ. So Allah will not forgive this person, إِلَّا أَن يَتُوب, unless he repents. And then he says, this is because the Prophet ﷺ gave the ruling that such a person will not be forgiven. And then he mentions the hadith, كُلُّ أُمَّتي مُعَافَى, but he doesn't quote the whole of the hadith, he just mentions that aspect of the hadith. Then he says, لأنهم مرتدون بفعلهم هذا. This is because they are murtad by this action of theirs. So takfir upon an action. Takfir upon an action. They are murtad by this action of theirs, of singing. And singing, we know, is fisq, and it's a very big sin. This is what he says. هذه ردة عن الإسلام. This is riddah from Islam. هذا مخلد والعياذ بالله في نار جهنم إلا أن يتوب. So this one is eternally in the hellfire, وَالْإِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, and refuge from Allah, in the hellfire, unless he repents. Now notice, even though he says, except that he repents, that makes no difference. Why? Because from the action itself, he says he's in the hellfire. So according to him, just on account of the action, he has apostatized. So this is takfir of, based upon a sin, which is a legacy of the Khawarij. And as we know, the well-known hadith where the man said to another man that Allah will not, the hadith of Jundub, the Messenger ﷺ informed that a man said to another, Wallahi, Allah will not forgive you. And then Allah the Most High said, who is the one who's claiming this? I've forgiven so-and-so, and I've rejected and destroyed your actions. That's a well-known hadith to everyone who has, acquaintance with the Salafi way and the Salafi methodology. And likewise we find in some of his other books, the way he talks in a very generalized manner. This is from Safar al-Hawali, where he makes statements like, وَاسْتَبَحْنَا الرِّبَى, that we have made permissible, we have made lawful riba. So see how this is a very generalized statement, as if the ummah and the Muslims and the rulers, as a matter of belief, have made permissible riba. And then built upon this, what comes next? وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ kafir, without any distinction. And likewise we find, just like Salman al-Awdah, he talks about, for example, he's given an example here. This is in one of his lessons, Durus al-Tahawiyya. This is one of the cassettes. He says, for example, Safar al-Hawali, sorry, yeah. So he says, for example, these people who gather within a hotel in this metropolitan region, and they come together, and there they have drinks and music, and so on and so forth, and they mix and so on and so forth. He says, نَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ هَذَا الْكُفْرِ, that we seek refuge from this kufr. So first he describes it as kufr. Then he says, لِأَنَّ إِسْتِحْلَالَ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهِ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى هُوَ بِلَا رَيْبٍ كُفْرٌ صَرِيحٌ. So notice how first he describes this act as kufr, and then he says, and because istihlal of what Allah has made forbidden. So now he's making it look as if this in itself is istihlal, meaning to declare something which Allah has forbidden to be halal, which is something which is not apparent, not clear, because these people are sinful, they can commit zina, they can do it openly, we know they're fasiq, and unless they do istihlal and they argue and they say and the hujjah has been established against them, this is istihlal. However, no, he immediately brings the next statement and says, لِأَنَّ إِسْتِحْلَالَ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهِ, as if this is, as if he's ascribing this cause to them. So, this is kufr sarih, and then he even brought in the issue of istihlal. So again, this is another example of how the bid'ah of the Khawarij hasn't died, but rather it's still there, and it's being supported and propagated in the words of these da'is who've been affected by the bid'ah of the bid'ahs of Ikhwan and the movement of Ikhwan, and specifically the books of Sayyid Qutb. And then we'll mention here the question that was put to Shaykh Nasruddin al-Albani concerning the book of Safar al-Hawali. He wrote a book called Dhahiratul Irja' fil Fikr al-Islami, the appearance of Irja' in the Islamic thought. And inshallah we'll discuss this a bit later, because the Khawarij, the Sururiyya, accuse the Salafis of being Murji'ah, because in their view or in their estimation, they don't do takfir. But this is wrong. The distinction between the Salafis, Ahlul Sunnah, is that they do takfir, however they have certain principles which they adhere to before they do takfir, as opposed to the Khawarij, the Sururiyya. So Shaykh Nasruddin al-Albani was asked, someone said to him, Kitab al-Irjah, have you seen it? And Shaykh al-Albani replied, he said that approximately 30 years ago from today, that occurred some words from me when I was in the University of Medina. On that day I was asked about Jama'atul Tabligh. So I said on that day that they are the Sufiyya Asriya. They are the Sufis of the era. And then he says, in the current times, then I say in relation to these Jama'ah, this group who have emerged and who have opposed the Salaf, wa khalafu Salaf. Okay, so those who have opposed the Salaf, I say here, in perfect agreement with the statement of Imam al-Hafiz al-Dhahabi, because in the same tape, earlier on, he clarified the issue about whether you should mention the good points about an individual along with the bad points. So in the same tape where this fatwa occurs, because the Sururiyya used the statement of al-Hafiz al-Dhahabi from his words, where they say, look, from his words, it's clear that you can mention the good points. So Shaykh al-Albani clarifies that and refutes that, and then using that very same principle which he affirmed earlier, he says, I now affirm, in perfect agreement with that what al-Hafiz al-Dhahabi affirmed, I say that they have opposed the Salaf in many issues of their methodology. And it's become clear to me, and it's obvious to me, that I call them Kharijiyya Asriya, the Khawarij of the era. And then he continues, he says that we read from their words many times meanings which are very similar to the Khawarij concerning the takfir of the one who commits the major sin. And we've read what Safar al-Hawali said, we've read what Salman al-Awdah said, we've seen what Qarni says, and so on and so forth. And then he says that either this occurs from them, either due to ignorance, or as a plot on their behalf. And then he says, and then he continues to explain, look, I will be just and I'll be fair, and I won't say that they are Khawarij POI, because you have to be just, but rather they share some of the aspects and some of the principles and some of the characteristics of the Khawarij. So after finishing this, the questioner says that that in the footnotes to this book, there is a phrase which occurs, which was by the hand of Safar al-Hawali, who says that the one who does not do takfir of the one who abandons the prayer, then he is murji. He is guilty of irja. So this is in the footnote to this book. So the questioner said to Shaykh al-Albani, that, have you seen this? And Shaykh al-Albani said, well, he denied. He said, well, look, I don't believe this could have come from Safar al-Hawali, because from what I've seen, from what is apparent to me, Safar al-Hawali, he respects me and brings about praise on account of me. So the point is that the Khawarij or the Sururiyya accuse the Salafi ulama who have principles for takfir. They say they are murji'ah, and they are upon the bid'ah of al-irja. Okay, so we finished there, and just to summarize this section, what we went through, we looked at the history of the Khawarij, the bid'ah of the Khawarij, the essential principles, takfir of a sin, and khuruj against the rulers, and some of the characteristics, how they have little understanding of the texts, how they have faulty interpretation of the texts, how they have evil manners with the scholars and accuse them of so many things, how they meddle into the affairs which really they are not deserving of, how they make ghibah and backbiting and so on and so forth permissible. So that was the second section. Now what we'll do, inshaAllah, we'll go on now and look at some of the specific characteristics of the Sururiyya, who now, as we've learnt, are the Khawarij of the era, and who are the promoters. As we said, every era has its promoters of innovation and has its supporters and aiders. And we look at some of their general characteristics, and then we'll go into some of their specific proofs that they use.